Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I want to welcome you to this continued celebration of this incredible place we call Mississippi, and all the people who are working so hard in the trenches to make it such a great place to live, work, and play. I want to welcome our listeners from the Mississippi Delta and the Jackson metro area, and of course SuperTalk TV across the state. I appreciate you engaging in the show. As I often say, the numbers continue to look great and people are engaging. And, what I've tried to do from time to time is connect the dots that actually exist between my Monday show, which is a celebration of outdoors in Mississippi, Super Talk Outdoors, and the Ricky Matthews Show. So when I get that opportunity, I want to be able to do that. And today we're actually going to talk about the public trust and wildlife in Mississippi, and what is at the base of what made Mississippi so darn popular from an outdoors point of view. What is this North American wildlife model at the basis of everything that we've done here, that wildlife belonged to the people? It sounds kind of lofty to say it, but at the core of it is the key to our success in this state. All of our conservation efforts have built off of that. And so if you live anywhere in the state, whether you hunt or fish or just enjoy the outdoors, if you enjoy the outdoors economy, if the outdoors economy is important to you, this is the conversation that you want to listen to, because we're not only going to talk about the public trust doctrine that passed the House 117 to nothing and is now sitting over in the Senate, that will proclaim wildlife belong to the people and cannot be bought or sold. We're not just going to talk about that, but we're also going to talk about the proliferation of chronic wasting disease in America and it's spreading in Mississippi, and why that's important to this overall conversation. So I've invited my friend James Cummings, who's the executive director for Wildlife Mississippi. He's also the chairman of Boone and Crockett Club. He's written extensively on the North American wildlife model, about fair chase, about ethical hunting. He's somebody I've enjoyed getting to know better, and not only is he a committed leader in the state of Mississippi in the conservation community, but he leads an incredibly important board, and we'll tell you more about what Wildlife Mississippi is all about here in just a second. Before we go any further, let me welcome James Cummings to the Ricky Matthews Show. How you doing, James?
I'm doing great, Ricky. Good to be here.
Yeah, listen, I want to bring people's attention to something. At SuperTalk.fm, you hear us talk about that on our various SuperTalk Mississippi radio shows, but SuperTalk.fm, I really encourage you to go to SuperTalk.fm. You can watch our shows there. You can listen to our shows. You can toggle down and go to any radio station in the state that you want to go to that's part of the SuperTalk Mississippi family, 26 radio stations, incidentally. You can get news there. Our news team at SuperTalk is incredible. Not only is it news for the 12 SuperTalk stations, but it's also the other 14 radio stations that they own, for a total of 26 radio stations that are under the umbrella of SuperTalk Mississippi Media, but then another 25 radio stations on top of that, where the audio part of our news, 51 radio stations across the state of Mississippi. So when we make news on these shows, that news is pulled and then sent to 51 radio stations across the state. So when you're listening to this show and we have newsmakers on the show, it goes into supertalk.fm, into that news product. It goes into an audio version that goes to those 51 radio stations. The bottom line is SuperTalk Mississippi Media has a very significant voice. I would encourage you to, when you go to supertalk.fm, to sign up for the newsletter. You're not going to find news from Indiana at SuperTalk Mississippi News. You're going to find important news that's happening in this state, especially during the legislative session. I'll also point out to you that if you go to supertalk.fm and then click on news in the menu, underneath that you can go to sports, or you can do that. You can go to opinions. I would say to click on opinion. What you'll find there are a couple of columns that I've written recently about the public trust and the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission and open meetings laws. You'll find something else I wrote about we need to take CWD, chronic wasting disease, very seriously. You'll find a column that James Cummings wrote, where he talked about wildlife belonging to Mississippians and why that's important. It's a terrific piece, but he's written a lot about it. He's an expert on the subject, so I'm not surprised by that. But James, thank you for contributing to SuperTalk Mississippi News.
Well, appreciate being a part. It's great to get what I think is a great message about the importance of our wildlife to our state and our citizens out on such a great radio station and a network.
Yeah. Hey, so James, tell me about Wildlife Mississippi. You know, why that's such an important organization.
So Wildlife Mississippi it was created a little bit differently than a lot of conservation groups. And if you kind of go back when we were formed in the mid 1990s, you had organizations, you had the Wildlife Federation, you had Ducks Unlimited, Wild Turkey, you had a number of great organizations in the state. But what kind of was really missing was, and it's really our leaders that people like Clark Reed and others that formed Wildlife Mississippi really felt like there wasn't an organization out there that really, focused on private landowners and really didn't focus on that connection of how can we use wildlife in the outdoors to improve Mississippi's economy and improve our quality of life. And that's a lot of why we were established, is to really try to make that link. And that's what I'm, we view most of the time we view wildlife, or we take it for granted sometimes, but we really don't view what it can contribute to solving a lot of our state's problems. Mississippi's not the wealthiest state in the nation economically, but if you look at wildlife, it represents a huge part of the economic impact in the state. And I can talk a little bit more about some of those specific numbers later. But look at health. Look at, we don't excel on health statistics, but getting out and exercise and eating white-tailed deer or venison, which has linoleic acid, that's really a preventer of cancer. I mean, looking at our huge military presence in the state and how can we conserve lands around those military bases to prevent base encroachment so that we keep our bases, functioning and they're able to achieve our mission. So a lot of times, one thing that I'm really excited about what we're doing as an organization, and also what the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund is doing, is really trying to solve a lot of Mississippi's problems.
Man, I'm proud of the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. We fought hard over a couple of years. And, I've often said this. I'm not critical to those that might have been opposed to it going in. It's not unusual, frankly, for bills, no matter how good they are, no matter how good the intentions are, for legislators to not be able to really focus on it the way they need to, because they've got a lot of competing objectives. That's for sure. So it took us a couple of years, but by the time we got into that second legislative session, there was very significant alignment around why we needed to do this. Mainly because, as you helped the lieutenant governor and others understand, that the matching funds are fundamentally the reason we need to do this, because without a fund like the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund, we were leaving so much money on the table that other states around us were taking advantage of. And it turned out that way. I mean, I think we're currently hovering around on the projects that have done. We've just gone through year 2 of the fund. We're hovering around a little over $3 per every $1 spent in matching funds. You're not surprised to see that. And I think as more projects become aware, as more federal money is tapped into, you would expect that number to continue to rise, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And think of it as an investment in Mississippi's future. Where can you invest $1 and get a 300% return on your money? I mean, it's a great opportunity. And if I look at the state, obviously from a state budget perspective, we don't spend a huge amount on natural resources. If you add up in park, environmental quality and forestry and soil and water commission and marine resources, all of that represents 0.05% of our general fund dollars. 0.05, not 1%, 0.05. So, having something that we can use as a trust fund to multiply those dollars to go after additional dollars is so important in a state where money's not running rampant.
Yeah, I can assure you, and as you and I have discussed before, and it might be a good place to sort of inject this, and that is that the outdoors economy in Mississippi is billions, and it is very significant. So why don't you share some of the numbers around that?
So you're exactly right. It's a $2 billion economic impact on the state. And if I look at as a group of us as outdoor enthusiasts, we spend about $6 million per day. We support an average of about $850 million a year in salaries and wages for almost 30,000 Mississippians. And I know we've been talking a lot about a diversion in terms of this funding the trust fund. Well, that diversion, and we're getting 15 million. And if we look at it from a standpoint of what would that diversion be based on our State Department of Revenue, they say we spend about 15 million a year, up to maybe 20 million in terms of taxes coming in on sporting goods. And in reality, that's around 180 something million. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the other economic impacts.
Yeah, when we come back on the other side, we actually will do that. Understand sort of some of the numbers behind the outdoors industry, and then we'll talk about chronic wasting disease and what we're learning about it. It's very real, and it's a slow march that's taken decades, but there's still not a solution for it. The best solution we have is implementing best practices to manage it. We'll come back on the other side and continue our conversation with James Cummings when we get back on the other side. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. Again, welcome to our listeners from the Jackson metro area and the Mississippi Delta and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and of course, SuperTalk TV at C-Spire TV. We're having a conversation with James Cummings, and he's the executive director for Wildlife Mississippi, but he's also a big-time leader in the Boone and Crockett Club as its current chairman. Isn't that great to be able to have those two roles sort of not only coexist but intersect in very, very interesting and important ways?
It really is, and it's kind of funny you said that, because a friend of mine and I were talking the other day. The CEO of Safari Club International is Laird Hamberlin. He's from Greenville, Mississippi. Him and I went from 1st through 12th grade together. The new president of the National Wild Turkey Federation grew up right across the river in Jones, Louisiana, and came to Greenville all the time. The Undersecretary of Agriculture over the Forest Service is Homer Wilkes from Madison, Mississippi. The Chief of the Natural Resource Conservation Service is Tallahatchie County, and the Chief of the Forest Service is from Baton Rouge. Look at just the way cool leadership that this region of our country has produced in the area of conservation. And I even gone back into history, with Senator Cochran and LQC Lamar and all of those. But it kind of makes you want to pinch yourself when you really think about the impact that Mississippi's had on our natural resources in this country. I mean, Keith Pittman of the Pittman-Robertson Act. Keith Pittman was born in Vicksburg, but I mean, it's really pretty awesome to be in such circles with such powerful people that have had an impact on the conservation of our country.
Well, as it relates to the Boone and Crockett Club, and we'll circle back to this in a second, but in my research of high fences and breeding facilities and pen-to-pen transferring of deers across the United States and the relationship that has with chronic wasting disease, I was blown away by the Boone and Crockett voice on ethical hunting, on watching the data as it relates to deer breeding and transfer, the whole notion of fair chase, the leadership role that Boone and Crockett has had in so many of these conversations dating back as far as I could look. I mean, if you just keep digging, you're going to find Boone and Crockett had a voice at some point along the way on lots of these issues. And we'll circle back to that in just a second. But let's get back to the economy. One point I want to make, when you mentioned diversion, I just want to make sure the listeners know what we're talking about. What we did is, first year we got $10 million for the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund. The second year we got $15 million. What we don't want to do is have to wait for the legislature through this budgeting process to allocate the money. What we would like to do is build in some kind of a tax diversion from sporting goods that would in perpetuity put money into this fund so we could constantly be seeking federal funds. It's important for a lot of reasons, but obviously we want to make sure the fund is financed every year. But what's really important is there are a lot of projects actually that might be multi-year, and you want to be able to know that next year and the year after that a certain amount of money is coming so you can commit to those projects. And so, I think we're getting more alignment. I think it's a tough legislative session because they've got so many issues. The peers retirement program, you've got the discussions around Medicaid expansion, you've got multi-billion-dollar economic projects that have financial pieces to them. I mean, our state leaders have a lot going at them right now, and that's one of the reasons why we'll get to this in a second. But we don't want the public trust doctrine to get lost in that dust. It's really important. We'll come back and we'll explain to you why that's so important. But the economic reality of the outdoors industry in Mississippi is important, and I think the more we invest in it, the more we can expect a return from that investment, not just in matching funds, but in just people engaging in the outdoors economy.
I mean, you think about it, it's a $3 billion ripple effect in terms of our state's economy. And I mentioned before break, that it generates over 180 million in state and local taxes, and that we spend 0.05% of our general fund on natural resources. Well, what does that mean dollar-wise? That's about $35 million. And then the trust fund's getting, another 15. So that puts us at 50 million. Sportsmen and women are paying state and local taxes over $180 million. That leaves a difference of 180 million minus 50 million of 130 million. We are under investing in our own tax revenue that we as sportsmen and women are putting into the state coffers in terms of getting that back and investing it back into the future of our natural resources. So, and I rattled off some of the economic impacts, and if this was July and I said, Ricky, we want to come to Mississippi and bring this economic impact. We want to employ 26,150 Mississippians. My phone would be ringing within 30 seconds. It'd be a special session, and we'd be throwing $1 billion incentive package toward this. So we all know that is 100% true. But we've got to do a better job of really recognizing the economic impact, and it's not just economic impact in general from a standpoint of state and local taxes. If I look at so many small landowners out there, they're leasing their land out for deer hunting, for turkey hunting. And as I mentioned in the column that you pointed out earlier, it's our state government, it's the Reeves administration's responsibility to safeguard this outdoor economy and safeguard our native wildlife. And we've got to do that, because the more we end up with CWD running rampant in our state, I know this, if I had CWD, would I want to continue leasing land from someone if I was in a CWD positive area? Maybe not. So we've got to take these things in consideration. It's not just about protecting something that we like to do as a hobby. This is huge economic impact to Mississippi. It's what makes Mississippi great. It's a huge part of our quality of life. It's a huge part of, we're talking about health. We're talking about economics. We're talking about losing so many of our students. They get educated here and they're running to Atlanta, to Dallas, to Nashville. These are the outdoors is a lot of what we can keep the brain power in Mississippi, but we've got to invest in it and make it better and accessible.
Yeah, the chronic wasting disease, I did a full show about it. I did a tremendous amount of research so I could come to a place where I could confidently talk about it. But chronic wasting disease is what's insidious about it is it's 100% fatal. It affects the brain. It is very slow to develop. So a deer could have it for a year or two and not show any signs, but still be contagious. So it's got a long incubation period. It's a slow march across the United States. And you can make a decision to change something to manage it, and you may not actually see the result of that change for a few years. Unlike some other diseases that might be viral or bacterial in nature, I think one of the points that Dr. Bronson Strickland made from Mississippi State Deer Program is that if you had a disease where deer are dying on the landscape and you can see it and it's sort of immediate, in other words, they get the disease within a matter of a short period of time, they die and you can see it, it's easy to get alignment around it. Well, that's what CWD does, except it does it over a long period of time. And it's hard to get alignment around it. And what's really good, I would really encourage people who want to learn about chronic wasting disease to go to SuperTalk Mississippi or to the SuperTalk. You can go to YouTube or Facebook, or you can go to SuperTalk Outdoors Facebook page and watch the show that we did last Monday. Important show because it had William McKinley from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Deer Program, and then Dr. Bronson Strickland. These guys are respected all across the United States. and we talked about the difficulties of managing. But one of the things they pointed out, and one of the things I made sure to point out, if you go to YouTube and just do a search of videos, you'll get a lot of videos that are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, where people were making, wrong proclamations about the chronic wasting disease back in those days. What you're finding today is that even the naysayers today agree that chronic wasting disease is here. And they even will agree, Ted Nugent actually says on a video, he's familiar with areas where it has exploded. His issue these days is about how we manage it. But at the end of the day, there's less focus these days on whether chronic wasting disease actually exists or not, but a lot of discussion around how to manage it. And what we're seeing as a result of all the studies that are happening, there's a national standard operating procedure now around data collection that's taking place. There are trends that are seen. There are best practices that are emerging. And we talked about all this on the show this past Monday. One of the things we did, Kyle, if you don't mind, if you want to grab that map, one of the things we did is we showed this map that is really, really important, and it's an independent assessment of where CWD exists in the United States. And this is a USGS map, and what it shows on the map, and I'll describe it to you, to the radio audience. It shows where CWD is in gray areas, where CWD has been found outside of enclosures, and then it shows red areas, which is where enclosures are where they have found CWD, and then there's yellow dots as well where there were enclosures where they depopulated. In other words, they went in and took every deer in that enclosure out. What you see when you look at it from sort of this high-level view, you can see there's incredible correlation between where deer are captive inside fences and their CWD and the surrounding areas that have CWD. It's and then when you started getting into that story about what's happening in places like Wisconsin, for example, the unique situation that's taking place in Texas, where from pin to pin they're spreading it. They've done a relatively good job so far of keeping it outside of the pins. I mean, they've got CWD in the wild, high fenced areas of Texas. But one of the things that Bronson pointed out during the conversation was that the reason why you don't see more areas of gray may be just simply time, that it hasn't caught up yet, and the testing hasn't caught up yet. But it's clear that this is beginning to spread in Mississippi, and so the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission has some really important decisions they've got to make about, are they willing to make some tough decisions as it relates to some of the best practices that are emerging. There are sets of best practices that are clear as you can see them when you look at the map. This state did this, and you don't see many gray areas, and this state didn't, and you see gray areas all over the place. It's a real serious problem. When we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with James Cummings from Wildlife Mississippi. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Have James Cummings, who's the executive director for Wildlife Mississippi here in Mississippi. They are a phenomenally important organization. They're leading on so many dimensions. I just can't tell you how important they are to Mississippi. He's also the chairman of the Boone and Crockett Club for the entire nation, which is such a great perspective it gives him. But not intending to try to get into all the nuts and bolts about chronic wasting disease and all of that. It's a problem in Mississippi. We've got to work to contain it. The way that I describe it is our goal is to reduce the prevalence. In other words, the proportion of deer in any given county that have CWD, to reduce it as much as we possibly can so we can continue to enjoy deer hunting in Mississippi. And also buy some time for science to catch up, because ultimately we're going to need some scientific solutions, that's for sure. But Mississippi now has in front of it best practices that are emerging in other states. And the question now is our Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission willing to implement those best practices? And discussions around supplemental feeding. Certainly, we've got to continue to stop the deer breeders who continue even today, even after this map that we just talked about. They're still working behind the scenes to try to make the sale and transfer of white-tailed deer legal in this state. We can't allow that. That would be a disaster, in my view. But you've watched this in your various roles, And I mean, if you get close to it and start to understand the developing science, the developing data, developing best practices, we're at a point now we can't take our eyes off of it. We've got to keep our eyes on it now, don't we, James?
You know, you think about where we are in the world and where we are with, if I get symptoms and I think I have the flu, I go to the doctor. I don't want to know all about the flu, and I just want to get rid of it. I want to get it out of my body. I want to get it out of my system, and I want to reduce my exposure to my wife or other people. And that's the way we've got to treat this. We've got to do things that. How do we try to figure this out, and how do we reduce exposure to the healthy side of the population in the state? And look, our state leaders are charged with that. That's not a maybe. That's state law. It's their job to protect the economy and our native wildlife from this kind of thing. So I'm confident they're going to do the right thing, and it's just too important to be playing Russian roulette with something that we know a lot about that is 100% deadly.
Yeah, listen, there are 5 members of the commission. All it takes is 3 votes to change the course of history. I like to say that a lot because that's true, and they're political appointees. They're appointed by the governor. 2 of the members of the current commission were appointed by Governor Tate Reeves. So they could, on a vote of 3, just with 3 votes, they could choose not to implement best practices that exist in other states. They could choose not to manage CWD aggressively and kick the can down the road for other leaders to have to deal with. But the fact is that this is a slowly developing situation. It's taken decades to get to where we are. We will leave our kids and our kids' kids a mess if we don't act. And the best practice is sitting right here in front of us. No. I say definitely not the best practice. The worst practice is sitting right here in front of us now. Well, all we got to do is look at Benton County, Mississippi. 1 in less than 4 bucks are testing positive now for CWD. And in northern Benton County, as William discussed, nearly no deer are making it past 3 years old. So if you're thinking about quality deer management and trying to get big horns and all that, I mean, if we replicate what has happened in Benton County, what's in the process of happening in Humphreys counties, and what could happen in other counties, we replicate that across the state of Mississippi. Deer hunting as we know it, as Robbie Kroger pointed out from Blood Origins, it could be the anchor that sinks deer hunting, not just in Mississippi, but in America. And we've got to join together with other professionals and focus on it. And that's the key. Any other points about that before we move on?
And so the Boone and Crockett we're mostly known for our records book. I'm fortunate to have 2 caribou in our records book. I don't have any whitetail deer in the book. But if you look back in history, because of people like William McKinley and Bronson Strickland and great research and great management, we've gone from shooting a lot of young bucks and not having a lot of large antlers to look at where we are today. Mississippi is one of the top 10 states in the nation in terms of putting quality or trophy whitetail deer in the Boone and Crockett record book. We've made so much progress thanks to sportsmen, to researchers at Mississippi State and elsewhere, to good managers like our State Department of Wildlife. Now's not the time to pull back. Now's the time to buckle down and make sure we try to beat this disease, and we continue producing quality animals. And that's whether you're high fence or not high fence, that's what you're wanting to do at the end of the day. You're wanting a quality whitetail deer or a trophy whitetail deer, that you're really proud that you may put up on the wall. You may enjoy the venison from it. I had fried venison last night, probably not the best fried, but I wanted to do it one last time before it got too warm. But that's really, we've just come so far. Now's not the time to stop.
The average Mississippian can't spend $2 or $3 million on a breeding facility. The average Mississippian is going to go to public land or some small acreage somewhere, and they're going to hunt deer, and maybe they're going to combine with adjacent property owners and put a QDM process in place. All the data suggests that Mississippians are buying into this whole notion around QDM. And we had a really interesting conversation after the show Monday, after the SuperTalk Outdoor show. Dr. Bronson Strickland, William McKinley, and I talked about QDM versus CWD management. And we're actually going to play that segment next Monday on the SuperTalk Outdoors radio show. It was fascinating because, see, some experts are saying that QDM is somewhat contrary to CWD management. But both of them made the point, and I think it's a good one, that in Mississippi we got a lot of population of deer. And so one of the most important attributes of the quality deer management is to get the duck to doe ratio down. We know that a lot of places in Mississippi, we got to get population of deer down. The best way to manage CWD actually is to get deer population down. So it may be that as the commission begins to, the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks Commission begins to get their arm around this, it could affect bag limits. It could affect maybe antler restrictions. There's a lot that could be discussed here within this realm that we ought to consider in Mississippi, because we know going into this that in certain areas of the state we have too many deer. That actually is describing extremely well the 3 farms that I lease, and we're working hard over the especially last year, we're working harder to manage the herd so that we can get the population down, get the density down. And by doing that, it's going to help us manage CWD, and it's also going to help us make bigger deer. Right. That's the key. So these things aren't contrary.
More food for the deer. By having more food, they're healthier. Their stress is reduced, and their resistance to disease. Their immune systems are stronger.
Yeah,
so it makes good sense all around. And a lot of people, you were talking about, Ricky, about best management practices. A lot of people aren't sitting on their haunches waiting, for others to take action. You've got a lot of timber companies like Westerveld and Resource Management Services and Weyerhaeuser that are taking upon themselves to make sure that the people that lease their lands are using best management practices, because they see it'll affect their lease rates if they get.
That's right.
So
That's right. Hey, listen, these videos are still getting passed around. Like this one video, incidentally, I'm a former digital media CEO, so I immediately go start to look and I was trying to source a video. In this particular case, it was posted on a website. It only had 34 subscribers, and it only been viewed 3,000 times. That's it. Supposedly it's a national video. And what the video says is that CWD is all about nutrition, and that it goes on to say that prions don't even exist. And smart people that I know are passing that video amongst themselves as if this is some alternative view of CWD. Scientists, biologists, and state resource people across the state do not buy into anything like nutrition. I wish it was, because then we'd solve the problem. But prions do exist, and these proteins can live for a long time, and it's a lot in the saliva, but they get it in other ways. And the reality is they transmit it from deer to deer, and it's a real problem. And so there are fewer people these days buying into these kind of quack views about CWD, and they really do buy into the science, even if they were a naysayer at some point. Again, then the debate is how to best manage it. Okay, let's move on. I think the public trust document that passed the House 117-0 helps put to bed this subject that we talk about on this show a lot, and that is the sale and transfer of white-tailed deer. As you saw from the USGS map, there's a great correlation all across America when we're transferring deer pen to pen. We don't want to do that in Mississippi. The public trust doctrine says that deer belong to the people and cannot be bought or sold. That no negative vote, not a single vote against it in the House. It sits on the Senate side now. It's a one-page bill that galvanizes what James Cummings has written about for a long, long time, and that is the North American wildlife model that proclaims that the wildlife belong to us, the people. When we come back on the other side, we'll tell you fundamentally why that's important. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. Appreciate you joining us. And I have my friend James Cummings, who is the executive director for Wildlife Mississippi and the current chairman of the Boone and Crockett Club. And he's just such a great leader in this state, and really a great leader all across the nation. He's a big fair chase guy. He's all about ethical hunting, and he's written a lot about it. But what he's most proficient at discussing is the North American wildlife model and the proclamation that wildlife don't belong to the kings anymore. It belongs to the public. and what this bill, the public trust doctrine that Chairman Kincaid of the House of Representatives Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Committee felt so strongly about. He tried to get it through last year and couldn't get it to move. He got it through this year and got voted and approved 117-0. Moves over to the Senate. Now the Senate can. I can't imagine any senator voting against it. I know politics kicks in, James, but how can any senator vote against the reality that wildlife belongs to the people of Mississippi and cannot be bought or sold?
I don't even know why they even have to think about it. I'm surprised it's not already passed. And by the way, Fair Chase was born in Mississippi in 1902 when Roosevelt refused to shoot the bear and the teddy bear was born. So, I mean, this is ground zero for fair chase hunting, but a lot of folks in our state don't see it that way. You're exactly right. I mean, when in colonial America, I mean, what we as common citizens that were trying to get away from the king for religious reasons, for any number of different kinds of reasons, for a better life, over there in Great Britain, the king owned the wildlife. So unless I was a friend of the king owned all the guns as well. So we couldn't overthrow the government. So when the United States was formed, or in colonial America, we wanted to do things differently so that the common person had the opportunity to hunt. And hunting was about survival. It was about food. It was not about trying to shoot something to put on your wall, or do both for something to mount and something to eat. So the United States set it up very differently so that wildlife is in the public trust. That means that whether you have, whether there are 5 columns holding up your home or 5 axles holding up your home, we all own our wildlife and we own it equally. So everybody's equal in that perspective, and everybody has a right to own a firearm as well. So those two things are really linked in terms of going back to the history of our country. And so however common, however poor, or however rich you are, you own the wildlife just like everybody else does in the state. But it's our state's government. It's their responsibility. It's their responsibility to be the stewards of that and take care of that for us. That's how we were set up as a country.
Someone described a person's focus on antlers to be antler porn. That some people in this United States are so focused on big antlers that they can't see the forest for the trees. They're just obsessed with antler porn. How did we get to this place where deer breeding and high fences, and by the way, a lot of people own the high fences in Mississippi that don't even supplementally feed. They do it to manage the herd. To me, that's a whole nother conversation. They're not interested in breeding. They're not interested in receiving any deer from anybody else's high fence facility. And they don't like the negative light that focusing on breeding brings to them. It's just this conflict that's happening, not just in Mississippi, but it's really across the state. But how do we get there? Because fair chases and ethical hunting should be something everybody buys into.
You would think so. Quite frankly, it's really the future. We're losing hunters every day in terms of the percentage in America. And we've got to make sure that we maintain enough support from the non-hunting public to continue hunting. People says, "Oh, but it's in our Constitution. We approved it not long ago." Well, if you get to hunt 30 minutes a year, that's still hunting is legal. So it's all about seasons and bag limits, as you mentioned earlier. And by the way, you were talking about Ted Nugent. You reminded me of something that another great rock star, Alice Cooper, said, and it was the title of his 3rd album called "Loving It to Death." And the reason I bring that up is, in many cases, that's how we're treating our forest. That's how we're treating our wildlife. We're loving it to death. And by doing so, whether we want to love it and put it in a high fence, we're actually doing so much harm that we're killing the very thing that we love.
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. We've got to do a much better job, and we as hunters have got to do a better job of maintaining that public trust. If we're going to continue to, because if I look at California now, right now at Colorado, ground zero, where CWD began, they're in the process of outlawing, a number of different species from bobcats to mountain lions to black bear and others. We don't need to continue to. If I look at our country, we're probably more divided now than ever. That's not where we need to be between hunters and non-hunters. We do not need to be like the rest of our country. Right?
Every minute we spend debating about whether we should allow the sale and transfer of white-tailed deer, what hunters fighting against hunters, is the anti-hunting community loves to watch us do that. The infighting makes us weaker. At the end of the day, we should all be focused together. That wildlife belong to the people, and that we've got to work together to fight something like chronic wasting disease, or the heritage that has made Mississippi the capital of the outdoors in America is going to be impacted in ways we can't even imagine. And all we got to do is look at North Benton County right now in Mississippi and say, do we want that experience to be in other counties across the state? And I think the answer is no. So what do we do about that? So, James, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you, my friend.
Same here, buddy.
You bet. This has been James Cummings from Wildlife Mississippi. Listen, have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.